everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Building Campus Power. In this session, it's going to be a little informal panel. We're going to be digging into a successful organizing campaign that OPEIU ran here in Minnesota at Augsburg University. So we're going to start with just a brief round of introductions. We'll talk about our name and when we first got started in organizing and our role, if that's relevant. So Martha Grant, Director of Cooperative Development here at Action Builder. And I first got started organizing as like a toddler walking picket lines. So we'll count that. Brandon, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Brandon Nessen, Organizing Director at OPEIU. I got organizing in the anti-war movement in Cleveland, Ohio, and when the country was headed towards war with Iraq.
Mike, would you like to go next? Oh, you're muted, Mike.
Sorry, Mike Bloomberg. I'm a librarian at Augsburg University. And I first got started with labor organizing a few years ago with a failed attempt to organize a union at Augsburg. And this last year, we were successful.
Wonderful. And Maxwell.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maxwell Posticker. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. I also want to acknowledge that I am currently situated on Dakota Anishinaabe lands, also known as St. Paul, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm physically located at this very moment. Up until recently, I served as the director for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual student services and equity and inclusion initiatives coordinator at Augsburg University. And I got started organizing, I want to say with the Vote No amendment when I was in freshly into graduate school. So thanks for having me.
Love it. I love that campaign. So to get started, Brandon, I would love you to talk a little bit about your introduction to Action Builder and how you first got involved with our cooperative development table. Set the stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been with OPEIU for a few years and pretty early on learned that we had been invited to participate with the Action Builder working group through the AFL-CIO. And it was really empowering and enlightening to be able to be part of that and see how we were taking this different approach to developing an organizing tool. I'd interacted with several other tools, other unions in the past, and always had some frustrations with them. And it was really exciting to see that we literally have a seat at the table with the developers who are working on and constantly improving the tool. So it has been a pleasure working with you and all the other affiliates in that process and having an avenue to bring direct feedback from organizers and organizing committee members in the field working on campaigns about how we can make the tool better. But yeah, we have been rolling out the tool in a number of places in our organizing network. We have currently over 13,000 workers and members uploaded into 27 different campaigns in Action Builder and have eight different OPEIU locals working with the tool. So we still have a ways to go in terms of bringing the technology to all of the organizers and locals that want or may want to use it. But it has been a great experience so far, and no better case in point to talk about that than the Augsburg campaign.
Yes. So maybe talking next to Brandon, how did the Augsburg campaign get started? What was the setting for that?
Well, Mike predates me on the origins of the Augsburg campaign, so I would defer to him, but my experience with it started in talking with Mike and just a few of his coworkers late 2019, beginning of 2020, and heard about some longstanding issues and a lack of respect and voice for staff members at the university, and wanted to change. And so we began working to form an organizing committee beginning of 2020, and things really took off in the spring. But Mike, do you have anything you'd want to add for more context?
Well, our campaign really started with me and 3 other people. One was a former student worker who became a staff member. And 2 other staff members, and we just kind of got together and talked union back in 2018. We tried to organize then. We got up to probably 30 out of 150 or so people before we started losing people and petered out in the summer. We got back together in December 2019, and that's when our more successful campaign got going once we connected with Brandon and OPEIU.
Mike, I'd love to hear how that connection happened. How was that connection made? Did you reach out? How did that get going?
Actually, one of my colleagues, his spouse was an OPEIU member, and so through them we were able to connect with the local and with Brandon.
I love that. I found that happens actually a lot. People will be wanting to organize a new unit, and it's some direct connection through like a close friend or a relative or a spouse, where it's like, oh, well, I'm in this union. You should talk to them, and then it happens and it goes from there. That's really fantastic. Out of curiosity, Mike, could you talk a little bit about how you kept track of your conversations during the first run of the organizing drive in 2018?
Google Sheets.
Yeah.
And they were a mess.
No, that's what we see a lot. I would say that about 80% of the organizers that I help transition to organize in Action Builder are coming from lots of tabs in lots of Google Sheets with lots of color coding. And it can be hard. It's hard to manage it.
Yeah, we were not that organized with all the tabs and color coding.
Well, there you go. So Brandon, can you talk a little bit about when you first brought Action Builder to the Augsburg campaign?
Sure. Yeah, it was pretty early on. Mike and 3 other initial committee members and I had been meeting every couple of weeks for a period of a couple of months, and weren't really seeing much progress. We weren't connecting with other coworkers to grow the organizing committee to what it needed to be. And so we decided, this is a tool we've been starting to pilot in a few other locals. I had never used it myself as a tool on the direct user end from start to finish in a campaign. So decided to just to try it out with this group. And so the 4 of them and myself, we uploaded the lists that we had into Action Builder and used it to start list building, which as we know as organizers is like one of the first steps. It is the first step in a plan to win, is having a complete and accurate list. So we were able to collaborate through Action Builder to develop and grow that list and refine it and keep it updated in a collaborative way. Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear Mike's thoughts too on those early days, how that may have helped in a certain way to kind of direct our energy when it didn't seem like anything was happening in the campaign, and also eventually, from Max's perspective, what it was like to be able to engage with the tool right as as you were coming into the campaign. But yeah, we introduced it early on, and continued using it all the way through winning the election, beginning of or end of 2019, or and end of 2020, beginning of 2021.
Yeah, I think we Brandon actually took our list that was an Excel spreadsheet in late January, probably, and loaded it in. Then we were able to start assigning values, or assessments to people. We were also able to start fleshing out the details about people. We spent a lot of time looking in our internal directory to get information to put in, searching Facebook and LinkedIn to find more information about people that we could use to make a connection. And that was quite a lot of work. We probably spent a month on that work.
Yeah, that work is so important to lay that groundwork. How did you feel that Action Builder helped you do that work? How was your personal sort of transition from using Google Sheets to Action Builder?
Well, it was great to be able to assign a coworker to one of our committee members, so that we could know who we're responsible for. Before that, it had always been, taking notes during a meeting to do that kind of work, kind of thing, and people would there'd be miscommunications, etc. Yeah, so that was really helpful to be able to assign, and helped us, I think, keep ourselves accountable, and keep each other accountable, because we could go in and see, did Hannah do her assessments this week or whatever?
Yeah, that level of transparency is really, really something that we go for and aim for. Maxwell, how did you get involved in the campaign? What was your entry point to this world of labor organizing?
So I joined Augsburg in the summer of 2019, and I got involved with the campaign, maybe 8-10 months of being at Augsburg. And that was all pre-pandemic. So 8 to 10 months of knowing physically the campus, having maybe met 20% of my colleagues in person, who Mike actually just referred to, Hannah, my very first week of being at the job was tabling at the Twin Cities Pride booth. And so I was there representing Augsburg University, and I had met this individual, and she reached out to me via email early in 2020, and kind of had this sort of hey, I hope you remember me from the Twin Cities Pride booth. Would love to just find a time to connect and chat and hear more about your work and your role. And I didn't think anything of it. And then when we had got to talking, I had soon picked up on the fact that we were having a conversation about unionizing, in which I had come from the Minnesota state system. So I had formerly been in the MAPE union. So was very supportive. I was very excited to jump on board. And I think that she took that energy and was like, okay, so you're not only pro-union, but maybe you want to organize too. And then here I am. So, months, years later, our numbers ebbed and flowed in terms of who would meet weekly. But for the most part, we kind of surfaced around 15 people. Sometimes we'd be 10, sometimes we'd be up to 25. But there was really a core group of people that organized, over 150 members. At one time, we were thinking we'd be, over 200 people. So So I got introduced to all of this completely virtual. So my entire organizing with Augsburg and using Action Builder had been through a digital and virtual platform. And I don't know how, I don't know if it's my personality or if I had, because of the department that I was in, I had the more opportunity to meet more people, but it seemed like my task list was always the longest. Like I always had at least 30 plus people assigned to me. I guess that's how higher education works. It's a small world sometimes. Um, but yeah, so I was up until, I've been active with the campaign until these last few months, after having left my role there. But yeah, so I have kind of that different perspective than Mike in the fact that my whole connection to it was through virtual platform.
I love that. Tell me a little bit about how you reached out to those 30 people on your list in this virtual pandemic environment. How did you build those relationships, maintain those connections? What was that day to day like?
Well, very strategic. Sometimes it was, when we as an organizing committee would meet, it was literally like, does anybody know this person? And they'd be like, well, I think I might have had a meeting with them. So sometimes there was natural connections. Oh, I worked on this project with this person, or oh yeah, I, have interacted with them in this meeting, or whatever it might be. And sometimes it was complete cold calls. So we did do some sort of assessment around like, are there our own lived experiences or identities or connection points? So for me, being an LGBT identified person, also being, an entry level, mid level sort of employee, is there things that I can connect to people about? And not doing it in a tokenizing way, but in a general, authentic way of like, who is going to feel most comfortable reaching out to this person and who might they be most receptive to as well. So I think there was some of that strategic. And then there was just like, Mike was always great about this. And like, well, I don't know him, but I'll call him. And I learned that about myself. Cold calling is not my strong suit in all of this. I'm the party planning, events having, strategic marketing, social media person in all of this. So we had a lot of folks who were just like, yep, I'm just going to jump into it. So a lot of times it would just be an email. It'd be like, hey, I am reaching out to colleagues. Shortly into the spring, we had been told that roughly 50 folks, 50 staff were going to be furloughed. Multiple staff were laid off. All of our our matching retirement was pulled, and other financial factors. And so that was a leverage point for us as staff to say, hey, reaching out to fellow colleagues to just check in. Since we can't physically be in space with one another, I want to see how you are doing mentally, emotionally. I also ran for staff senate. Many of us who were on the organizing committee ran for staff senate. That was a talking point at one time to say like, hey, I'm running for staff senate. I would love to hear your thoughts, and kind of indoctrinate them from there. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it was super awkward and be like, let's set up a Zoom, and then you just have to feel them out. Sometimes it would open up right away. Sometimes it'd be like, I spent an hour with them and I still don't know. I didn't bring up the U word, as we would eventually say. But yeah, it just really was situational and person by person.
I love it. I love it. That is a lot of information, a lot of moving pieces to keep track of. Can you talk a little bit from your perspective, Maxwell, about how Action Builder played into keeping track and organizing that information?
Yeah, so I'm a task-oriented person, somebody who lives with ADHD. This was very helpful for me, having like the visual components to it, as Mike kind of alluded to, the accountability. Since we were a small team, there was a lot weighing on us at all times. when there's 10 to 15 of us who are in charge of 150 people, sometimes that can be a long list. And not everybody has, 30 members that they're contacting because maybe they only know 5 or whatever it might be. So I know that was an accountability piece for me. It was kind of this I can go in and be like, yes, contacted this person, checked them off, that sort of like validation standpoint. And I think the thing I liked about Action Builder, and we kind of had this conversation, Augsburg is a Google campus. So it was nice to have a completely separate platform because I think a lot of times, as most of us do, if we're Google users, we have a tendency to want to kind of flow back and forth between our personal and our professional Google spaces. And so it was a clean cut, knowing that there was no potential that Augsburg was going to have the opportunity to see this information.
That is huge. I know I frequently will create something for work in my personal Gmail, and in a campaign like this, that is a high risk. And that's not something I had thought about before. That's a big one. Mike, I'd love you to talk a little bit about, since you were organizing pre-pandemic, and then bam, pandemic happens, everything goes virtual. How was that transition for you? What was your perspective on making that transition as part of this organizing campaign?
Well, honestly, I think it was easier for me in the virtual space because it was easier to, as Max said, just contact people. I've been at Augsburg for 20 years, so I know a lot of old timers. I didn't know a lot of people who had just started like Max. But it was easy for me to contact people and go, hey, I want to check in and see how you're doing. And then have coffee over Zoom and, kind of work up to the U word, right? So can I talk about Ben's question in the Q&A?
Go for it. Yeah, we can take Q&A questions and chat questions throughout, or we can also save them for the end. Up to you all. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so the nice thing about Action Builder with their debrief kind of thing was, we could put in Action Builder just a brief contact date and assessment or not assessed yet or whatever, which is great for later on saying, we haven't talked to this person in a month, we should get back with them. But also we could go through the list and say, how did that conversation in our weekly meetings go, right? So we would say, okay, Max talked to somebody, how did that conversation go? And yeah, I think it made it easier to do the debriefs because we had that list right there that we could all see. Does that answer your question, Ben?
Smiley face from.
And he's saying, or do the debriefs always have long storytelling? Well, we're humanities people. We love stories. So I think there is naturally going to be storytelling.
The storytelling is so critical for building the relationships too, in my opinion. I love that component of the organizing campaign as well. Brandon, I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective about the process that you used to bring Action Builder to the campaign, and like what it was like from your perspective to help Mike, Maxwell, the rest of the organizing committee really run with it, especially since this was remote. You weren't able to go and be in person like you would normally.
Yeah, it definitely took somewhat of a leap of faith to try something new. When something is high stakes as a union organizing campaign, and not falling back on sort of the old methods of spreadsheets and wall charting that I was used to, but especially given the unique circumstances with the pandemic, it all made sense and came together. But the idea as an organizer of opening up the database to the organizing committee members to, in this case, fully access. As folks who have used the tool know, it's possible to restrict access in different ways to mitigate risk. But in this case, we felt like we had a good onboarding process for the organizing committee and tight relationships that we could trust. And so we opened up the database in Action Builder to all the committee members. And I think that did create a sense of co-ownership over the campaign and responsibility and accountability to own the data as we went from list building to committee building to majority building to publicly campaigning for recognition and the election. The visual part that Maxwell referenced as well came into play in the virtual nature of our committee meetings. This was the first campaign I ran virtually through Zoom. And I was encouraged that it worked, that we could have effective organizing committee meetings on Zoom by putting up Action Builder on the shared screen in the place of a wall chart, and being able to have similar effect of being able to see what departments are we strong in, which ones are we weak in, where do we need to recruit committee and support from, tracking relationships across the university, and things like that. And then having that sort of week-to-week accountability of how those conversations were going that Mike and Maxwell referenced all played out pretty well, interacting with the tool virtually over Zoom. So that was that was really it was really great. And just I guess one other thing on the question about debriefing and kind of keeping track of what everyone was doing, the activity stream that's been developed in the tool was particularly useful from our perspective as organizers, to be able to see, okay, we have 15 plus committee members plus a couple organizers, all were interacting with this database. How do we know who's doing what and why they're doing what they're doing? So being able to see an activity stream in real time, the updates and edits that were being made, and additional notes and pieces of information that were being added to the database, and then being able to track down the person on the committee that made that update to be able to check in with them about it, was a really helpful part of our workflow as well.
Awesome. And just a quick plug, we'll be talking about the activity stream and other features with screen shares at the end of the day today at the 4 p.m. Eastern session, and then all day tomorrow, really digging into the tool and how to implement it. Brandon, you talked briefly about that moment of, after you started to build your structure, really gotten going, that going public moment. I would love to hear how that went down given the pandemic and given that we were all virtual. I don't know who wants to speak to that first, but I am so curious to hear what that process looked like given remote.
Yeah, we should all share our perspective on that. That was a really momentous day. Maxwell and I had never met in person until that day, and we had been meeting for, I think, 6 months. By the time we got to, I believe it was the end of October, and we had all the supporters not only sign union authorization cards electronically, of course, remotely, but also sign on to a public letter demanding that the university voluntarily recognize them, which we met in a park on the Augsburg campus with a large group of supporters, and then marched it to the president's office, the public letter to the president's office, with some local media and community supporters. So yeah, it was quite an experience to all of a sudden meet this amazing group of committee members that I had been meeting with through Zoom for 6 months, had made all this progress, and now we're finally at this critical part of the campaign meeting up in person, of course, with Augsburg union masks that we printed in a socially distanced way. But it really, I think we really we're able to generate even more momentum for the campaign in the way that we went public that day. But curious what Maxwell and Mike's experience was.
Well, when Brandon says a large group of supporters, there was a state mandate of no more than 15 people in an outdoor gathering at the time. So most of it was on Facebook Live.
Yeah.
And Max was there. I wasn't actually physically there that day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can share a little leading up to that moment because I definitely was responsible for why we went public. I think we were ready. I mean, I don't want to put a percentage on it. Like, I think we might have wanted a little bit more time, but overall, numbers wise, I'm glad to see you have a cat on the screen. My dog, if you hear some weird noises, it's my dog in the background.
Yes.
Numbers wise, I think we felt good. I think with any campaign, the idea of going public is very nerve wracking. So I had actually had a conversation where I was feeling super confident. I was talking with an administrator's assistant, and the conversation itself went well. And then I got an email from them that kind of tipped us off to the fact that they were going to they felt obligated to have to share this with their supervisor. And so from that moment, we were like in high gear, and we're like, okay, this is it. Here we go. We're gonna make this happen. And I had lots of tears. I had this moment of like, oh my God, like this campaign is gonna be over. It's being like all of this work. And I felt super confident in this conversation, and then it didn't go how I felt like it was going to. But yeah, we met that day in a park that's actually not campus property, oddly enough, but it's on campus. And we had media there. Myself and two other staff members went to the president's office where he was not available. So we had left our letter with his assistant. And yeah, we came back and made a public announcement about our delivery. And it was a huge, huge relief. It was just so nice to be able to be out in the open. For me, as a queer transmasculine person, like I know what it's like to have to navigate life, oftentimes in silence, and how this isn't the same by any means, but it had that sort of like sentiment of being in community, being with people who love and support you and are doing the right and the good thing, and to be out and open about that, and to be able to then like make very intentional decisions and movement to further our campaign was just really rewarding. So that day, it was also nice to see some of my colleagues for the first time in months, physically in person. So
I love that so much. And I so appreciate your being honest too about how that going public happened. I think that is the story of so many organizing campaigns. And I don't feel like it's shared often enough that usually it is a moment like that that means that the campaign has to go public. And then it's all about being able to move fast. And the fact that you all were able to move as fast as you did is so inspiring and so awesome. So really, really appreciate that. So
well,
you go, oh yeah, Mike.
I think Max is taking a lot more on than he should, because we had saved contacting these administrative assistants until the last minute, and we made the decision as a group that it was time to start contacting them. So it's not Max's fault.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, Mike, too. And that's also like super strategic to know that pool could be the ones to break the news and saving them for last. So like heads up, thumbs up on that too. So you go public. I would love to have one of you, or maybe all of you, talk about after you went public, what that final sprint looked like and what role Action Builder played in that final sprint. Brandon, you're nodding. Maybe you want to go first.
Sure. Well, after we demanded voluntary recognition that day, it was declined, but we were able to reach an election agreement for a mail ballot election that started in, was it mid-December or early December, something like that, for a
But
period
it's the
of,
week before Christmas.
okay, with a week before Christmas is when the ballots were sent out. And so so folks had to be voting over the holidays, and that means we were doing GOTV over the holidays. And so, yeah, the part that I would add is that it was really great to have Action Builder be a tool that could seamlessly transition to that phase of the campaign as well, when it came to reconfirming the support of every single card signer on a vote plan, and tracking that, and then eventually turning those votes out and confirming that they had happened one by one, including some house visits that we did do to a small number of targeted folks that we weren't reaching through the phone in other ways, being able to use the integration of the map tool in Action Builder for our folks that did go out to do house visits to be able to make routes and to be able to navigate to their coworkers' homes that they were going to visit. It was really great to see. So yeah, tracking continued assessments, making sure that every supporter remains supportive, that they were making a concrete vote plan, and then actually voting during the vote period, which included a blizzard as well. I believe that we have some great pictures of people carrying their ballots to the mailbox, and doing that. So just despite all the things that were thrown at us in this campaign, it's just an incredible group of people that Maxwell and Mike are part of, that just made an incredible campaign happen during a pandemic, during the holidays, during a blizzard. Nothing got in the way, and Action Builder helped with that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I appreciate about Action Builder is the task function, because we were doing so many various techniques. We were, to get folks accustomed to getting their mail, holiday time. We sent out our Augsburg Staff Union face masks with like a postcard. We were handing those to folks in person as we were kind of transitioning back. We were, doing all sorts of different like social media campaigns. So that was a nice way to be able to keep track of who had done what, because it was very clear that there was some folks who were willing to do some things and not others. So there was a lot of folks who were very fearful about retaliation. And so taking a photo, having, their physical image attached to something felt very vulnerable to them, but they would wear a mask, or, instead of changing their Zoom background, they were willing to have like our Augsburg Staff Union logo as their profile picture on Zoom, or some of those sorts of tactics. So we were able to keep track of all of that through Action Builder, because for a while we were coming up with all sorts of great ideas, but had we not had the organizational tool of Action Builder, it would have probably been a hot mess to keep track of.
I love that so much. So you actually had like changed background on Zoom as a response in Action Builder? That's so fantastic. I love to hear that. Mike, I'd love to hear from you, that final stretch, the mail ballots. How did that go from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, my primary memory of that is the super stressful mail slowdown just before Christmas, when it was being administered by the Minnesota Bureau of Mediation Services, because we didn't want the months-long process to go through NLRB, and they mailed them out, and we expected to start calling people. They mailed them out on, I think, Thursday, and we were expecting to start calling people on Monday, reminding them to watch their mail, and people didn't get them until like Wednesday or Thursday a week later, and they only had 2 weeks to get them back. So that was kind of nerve-wracking, calling people over and over, hey, did you get your ballot yet? But on the other hand, it was great seeing all of the pictures of people with their ballots at the mailbox. And we asked our supporters to do that, to take a picture of themselves with their ballot at the mailbox and post it on Facebook or Instagram. And then in the end, we had 87% of votes were yes. And it was what, 70% of the total unit size or total unit were yes.
That is
over
spectacular.
70%.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was nerve-wracking and very busy especially over Christmas break, when you expect to be, relaxing. But in the end, yeah, January 7th was great. That was the day our vote count came out.
I love it. I love it. So I do want to have some time at the end for questions. If you do have a question, please drop them in the chat or use the Q&A feature, and I'll be repeating those questions back and asking them to this wonderful crew who've joined us. Before we head into the Q&A, victory. I'd love to hear how that sweet, sweet victory felt for each of you, and what your sort of main feeling was, your main hope for the future was with that win. Maxwell, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think for, against all odds, like Mike had alluded to, we had two holidays, Christmas and New Year's, that were, in between the vote count. We had folks that were out of state, that were having to first class, send their mail back. It was incredibly stressful. So we, as Minnesotans do, weather's not going to stop us. We had a little tailgating party outside the building where the votes were being counted. Only Brandon was allowed in there, and unfortunately he couldn't video it or anything. So we were all paying very close attention to kind of our chat group that we had. And myself and I don't know, maybe a dozen or so others were out in the parking lot waiting for the news, and it came through, and just a huge relief. But I think, some of the other fun aspects that I also want to give a shout out to is we've had a huge movement here, an organizing movement, particularly in the service industry. So we had actually been paying really close attention to places like Tattersall and Fair State Brewing. And I actually reached out to Fair State, and they were very kind enough, shout out to Fair State, to give us a case of their Union beer to celebrate our win. And so most of our Union celebrations have been at Fair State, because it's a great way to obviously support, a local union organization, but because they have supported us. And I think that's really come through here in the Twin Cities, is unions showing up and supporting one another. And the photo that Jeffrey had shared was in my backyard. We also did a lot of outdoor, bundled up in our coveralls, bonfire celebrations, socially distanced as well. So it was, I felt like for myself in my career, it was a huge victory and something that I am excited to continue to take forward, and really has been an outlook on thinking about is organizing in my future in a different capacity as I move forward. So.
Love it, love it. And before we head into the Q&A portion and answer some of these great questions that are coming in, Mike, this was a big, long victory for you. Tell me a little bit about your experience with that, winning that vote.
Yeah, being in that parking lot with Max and the other folks was an amazing morning. And, then I went back to work.
Yeah. I love it. And then Brandon, I want to hear your experience being in the actual room where the counts were happening. What was that like? Were you actually able to use Action Builder to cross-reference as the ballots were being called, or what was that process like for you?
Yeah, we felt pretty confident in the numbers that we had recorded in Action Builder of the vote plans that had got in. I think we were a few off, but like any vote count, I guess it was a little bit less nerve-wracking because I was the only one in there. Usually I'm in there with an organizing committee also watching the votes be counted, and the employer. The employer just sent their attorney, so it was a little awkward, but yeah, I mean, it always is intense and anxiety producing to be in a vote count, and to have the numbers go the way that you track them is always a great moment. But actually walking back out into that parking lot to celebrate with these two committee members and the others was even greater, and the other celebrations that we had after that. I mean, this campaign to me was both reaffirming in some of the core organizing principles that I've learned, that many others have learned and use, in terms of good data management, complete and accurate list, building strong organizing committees that lead the campaigns, building to super majorities before going public, and then having strong shows of public support. All those things looked very different in this campaign, but it was reaffirming that those principles could still apply even during the global pandemic. But the campaign also showed me that that every campaign is different, and this is a very special and unique group of people who come to their jobs from a very mission-based perspective, and actually truly love the place they work and care about it deeply, and just want to make it better and live up to its true mission. And it was really transformative for me to be working with a group like that, that came about organizing with that mindset, and all the different ways we had to adapt and do things differently on the fly. I learned a lot through this campaign, and one of the things that was also different was using Action Builder from start to finish. So it was a really really great campaign to work on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brandon. So we're going to head into the Q&A portion. The first question, I don't know who wants to take it, but it's a logistics question. So why did you choose US Mail as opposed to an online platform for the vote? Who wants to talk about that final vote and the options available?
It was simply because the Bureau of Mediation Services, who we agreed with management to use, didn't have an online platform they could administer, but they could get a mail vote started in less than 2 weeks.
Nice, yeah. And Brandon, from your position, have you heard of many campaigns happening using an online platform? I've mostly heard of mail-in so far.
Yeah, mail-in has been the method used by the NLRB during the pandemic, and but I have heard of other unions using electronic systems when they can get employers to voluntarily agree to use them. That was something we did pitch to the Augsburg management team, and they weren't interested in going that direction. But I did see that there's movement at the NLRB right now towards electronic voting, which would be a very interesting and potentially exciting development for union elections.
Yeah, awesome. I have another question. Let me see who it's from. Dimitri. And I'd love Maxwell and Mike for you to especially dig in on this one. How do you think your experience with Action Builder might have been different if it weren't for the pandemic and in-person organizing was more possible?
Yeah, I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I think just because of the pandemic, we had to get really innovative. And I think just being in that innovative mindset, we were able to get curious with how to use Action Builder and how to really use its full potential. It just became a habit. Obviously, if you're working in a virtual space, to use this, virtual software. so that when I was having a Zoom call, I'd go right in and just like update my notes in Action Builder and look for the next person, find their number and call them, or, whatever the conversation looked like. Um, I think, it was knowing myself. If I were having these conversations in person, I'd have to like remember this and then bring that back and like upload it into Action Builder. So I think it was more ease, if anything, just operating completely through a virtual space. And again, I think it really challenged us to think creatively. We mentioned the Zoom backgrounds. We did things like showing up to all campus meetings and just trying to have a Zoom background plastered with our union logos and our Zoom backgrounds. Or, more recently in these last couple of months, a bunch of folks who are not on the bargaining team showed up to a bargaining meeting. And I think the administrators and the attorney were really caught off guard by that. And so, having an Action Builder, it was a really easy way to take a screenshot and then go back and incorporate, who was there and who participated in these various different actions.
Love it. And Mike, since you did organizing pre-Action Builder, pre-pandemic, and then pandemic with Action Builder, what's your opinion on that? How do you think Action Builder would have been different for you if you were allowed to be in person?
Well, so when we started using Action Builder before pandemic, we would be in a physical meeting and we would all be looking at it on our phones. And I actually think switching our meetings to Zoom and having a shared screen was helpful in that way, because we would spend a lot of time going, oh, what screen are you on our phones, right? So I do think that if you're having in-person meetings, maybe being able to project it or somehow some other way share the experience with each other would be helpful. Although the phone experience is not horrible, right? As so many websites are.
Yeah. And actually, that's a great segue. Mike, if you want to handle the next question. So Vanessa asks, how easy was it to navigate on your phone? So do you want to just give your quick opinion on that?
Yeah, I actually think it's fairly easy to use on your phone. It follows the standard kind of phone navigation protocols, hamburger menus and whatnot. So to me, it was fine. Kind of unremarkable, but fine.
Unremarkable is kind of what we aim for. I love it. So here's a great question from William. What were some of the really tough questions workers had for you during your Zoom meetings on the campaign? And how did Action Builder's platform help you track and then share that info when people had those tough questions? Mike, Maxwell, whoever wants to take that one.
I'm trying to think of tough questions. I mean, the kind of standard questions, are we going to harm our employer somehow? Things like that. I mean, as Max talked about, being able to take notes in Action Builder while you're having this conversation, so that you could help bring that back to mind later, was really useful. So I think, as Max said, when you're actually able to take your notes while you're talking to somebody, so it's not an in-person thing where you're looking at your phone or whatever, writing on a piece of paper, that's actually very helpful from my perspective, the virtual meetings.
Yeah, and I would say the only other thing, so our organizers would oftentimes just help by, writing a script. And so that was something that we had available to us. So again, nice to have kind of the ability to be on your computer where you can split your screen, Zoom, and your Word doc or whatever. And so that was just a nice reference sheet with, folks who were asking questions about, like, yeah, we're worried that this is going to, sink our employer, or, well, wanting numbers or some sort of statistics. But more so, it was helpful to have like all of the facts in front of me to make sure that I was like hitting all my talking points, but to have a better way to maybe reframe when I was like feeling like I was backed up against the wall, and having some of those sorts of like, if they ask this, this is how you can respond to that sort of thing. So that was nice to just have and have available through Action Builder. And then, yeah, just to be able to take your notes right there instead of writing your notes down and then uploading them. So it's just eliminated an extra step.
I love it. I love it. We have one last question. Will you continue to use Action Builder for internal organizing to win your first contract? And if so, how do you plan to use it?
Well, I can talk about that because I'm on the negotiating team. And we're using it basically the same way we did during our organizing phase, reassessing people regularly. When we come up with things we want people to do, like change their Zoom backgrounds again, we now have a contract Zoom background that we are asking people to use. We're asking everybody to do an email signature, tracking that. So it's the same kind of tracking actions that we used before. And even like now, we're planning a social event, a picnic for our staff, and we're using Action Builder to track who's RSVP'd for the picnic.
I love to hear that. I just want to echo William in the chat. You all rock. Thank you so much for this panel. I know I've learned a lot from it. I think this was just a fantastic overview of the organizing experience from start to finish, winning an LNLRB election style campaign. This was immensely valuable, so appreciate it. Jeff just dropped the link to the next session in the chat. So go ahead and hop on over there, and really, truly, thank you, Brandon, Mike, Maxwell. So appreciate you. So appreciate all the work you do and all the work you continue to do as you win that first contract.
Thanks so much for having us, Martha.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Drop my info.
Yes, thank you. Feel free to drop your info in the chat. We'll leave this room open for the next couple of minutes. So you can go back through, click on any of those links, follow Augsburg Staff Union on Facebook, on Instagram. Feel free to follow up with our presenters with any other additional questions you have. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.